Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, Shalom, Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, and Salam Kebajikan. Our respectable Dean of Engineering Faculty of Universitas Pancasila, Dr. Insinyur Budi Mulyawan Suyitno, IPM. Our guest lecturer, Professor Walter Timo De Vries, and our moderator, Mr. Wahyu Dewanto, Ph.D. Ladies and gentlemen, attendees of the public lecture event and invited guests. Let us give our praise and gratitude to God for our attendance on the event of public lecture with the theme Interaction of Land Use and Infrastructure, Mobilizing Land for Infrastructure. For a brief moment, we would like to invite you to sing Indonesian National Anthem, Indonesia Raya, followed by Universitas Pancasila Hymn.
Tetapkan hati masa depanmu.
Before we carry out our activities today, let's take a moment to pray according to our respective religions and beliefs. Prayer begins. Prayer finished. Opening speech from the Dean of the Engineering Faculty of Universitas Pancasila. Please welcome Dr. Insinyur Budi Mulyawan Suyitno, IPS.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera untuk kita semua. Salam, Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, Salam Kebajikan, Salam Pancasila. Good morning, Profesor Timo. Alhamdulillah, pada hari ini kita akan mengikuti kuliah umum yang akan disampaikan oleh Profesor Timo De Vries. Beliau sudah ada di samping saya dan mudah-mudahan nanti bisa diikuti oleh para mahasiswa, bukan hanya mahasiswa RIL, juga mahasiswa lainnya, dan juga para dosen, para peneliti, sehingga akan menambah semaraknya kuliah tamu yang diberikan oleh visiting professor. Ini merupakan bagian dari program studi Magister, Rekayasa, Infrastruktur, dan Lingkungan. Dan mudah-mudahan akan memberikan kebaikan dan keberkahan untuk kita semua. Selanjutnya izinkan saya menyampaikan dalam bahasa Inggris, mudah-mudahan bisa dimengerti dan dipahami oleh kita semua. Sebenarnya Prof. Timo sendiri, beliau bisa berbahasa Indonesia. Jadi kalau nanti ada pertanyaan kepada beliau, nggak usah takut, sampaikan saja dalam bahasa Indonesia. Ada Mbak Nining yang bisa menerjemahkan, ada Bu Atik, ada Pak Niko yang bisa bantu menerjemahkan. Jadi feel free saja, silahkan. Bisa berbahasa Inggris juga boleh sambil latihan, bisa juga langsung dalam bahasa Indonesia. Izinkan saya melanjutkan dalam bahasa Inggris. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, especially our distinguished speaker, Professor Timo De Vries. I am delighted to welcome each and every one of you today to extend a warm greeting to our esteemed guest lecturer, Professor Timo. It is a true honor for us to have Professor Walter Timo De Vries among us, a figure widely celebrated and admired in his field of expertise. Professor Walter Timo De Vries has devoted his career to the realm of land management, and his presence here signifies his unwavering commitment to the dissemination of knowledge and education. Today's lecture promises to be enlightening and inspiring, offering us valuable insights into the mobilization of land for infrastructure. We are indeed fortunate to have the opportunity to learn from such a distinguished Professor Timo. Before we proceed, I want to express my heartfelt appreciation to the Master Program in Infrastructure and Environmental Engineering for their diligent efforts in organizing this event, especially for Dr. Atik, who is the head of this study program, REL. In collaboration with the Department of Civil Engineering, Ibu Ani, and the Department of Architecture as well, Ibu Dini, of Universitas Pancasila. Now I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Wahyu Dewanto, who is in Australia at the time, join us. He will serve as the moderator for this event. Let us warmly and enthusiastically welcome them as They share their knowledge and expertise with all of us. Thank you, and let's ensure that this lecture becomes a memorable and enlightening experience for everyone in attendance. Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin, maka kuliah umum ini kita buka bersama-sama. Dan terima kasih atas perhatiannya. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Om Santi Om.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Mr. Budi. In the next event, let us listen to the presentation from the visiting professor. We will hand it over the event to the moderator, Mr. Wahyu Dewanto, Ph.D. Mr. Wahyu, time is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Before we start, can you please confirm that you can hear me clearly?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, thank you, thank you. And okay, before we start, I think on the rundown, there is a documentation and mementos for a photo together for us. Is that still in place, or we just continue?
Yes, you may lead the photo, the event.
Okay, all right. Okay, thank you. Okay, before we start for documentations, let us take a group photo at this special events. Please, everyone, to turn on your camera for group photos. And probably the technician over there who can take a photo together.
Yes,
please.
Yes, sir. Please come. Okay, Mr. Wahyu, done.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Good morning, everyone, whether you are here in the campus of Pancasila University or joining us via Zoom. Good morning, all. Thank you for being with us today. Okay, we are gathered today here to listen to a public lecture by Professor Timo De Vries, titled Interaction of Land Use and Infrastructure, Mobilizing Land for Infrastructure. This is a very interesting topic. Okay, for those who may not be familiar with me, I'm Wahyu Dewanto, a lecturer in the postgraduate program at the School of Infrastructure and Environmental Engineering, Faculty of Engineering, Pancasila University. I will be serving as your moderator for today's lecture. Okay, today's lecture is organized by School of Infrastructure and Environmental Engineering, and also the School of Civil Engineering and the School of Architecture at Pancasila University. This public lecture aims to provide valuable insights and knowledge to our participants and serve as a platform for discussing the intricate interplay between land use and infrastructure in urban areas. So we got our distinguished guest, an expert in this field, will present several real-world cases and best practices in the interactions between land use and infrastructure from various cases. We also privileged to have Professor Timo De Vries. Hope I pronounced this correctly. A senior lecturer from the Department of Land Management at the Technical University of Munich, Germany. I believe his presentations will offer both academic and practical insight for our audience to learn from. A little bit things that I need to say here is the Faculty of Engineering has recently introduced the School of Infrastructure and Environmental Engineering. We call it MREL, a specialized program crucial for Indonesians' future development. Dr. Ati Tri Juniati is the head of the programs, and Dr. Nyoman Teguh Prasida is also the key role in this faculty or in this program. Our goal is to establish this school as a reputable institution in infrastructure and environmental studies. So the interactions between the land use and infrastructure is important for urban and rural development. Hence, we have included this critical topic in our postgraduate curriculum as an interaction of land use and infrastructure. So we expect the subject to provide students with extensive knowledge and theories on land use and its profound implication. Meet Professor Walter Timo De Vries, the man with a CV so lengthy, which is roughly 10 pages long. Unbelievable. That reading it all might just earn you a 2-hour nap. It's going to be long, but don't worry, we'll serve the condensed version for you to see the background of Professor Walter. So shortly, Walter Timo De Vries, born in June the 6th, 1965, is a Dutch national, not Germany, right? Dutch, married with father of 2. And 2015, he served as an associate professor and chair of land management department at the Technical University of Munich in Germany. His educational background includes a master's degree in geodetic engineering from the Technical University of Delft, 1988, and a Ph.D. in public administration from Erasmus University Rotterdam, 2013. He speaks a lot of languages, including Dutch, English, and proficient in several other languages. Don't be surprised, including Indonesian. His professional interests encompass land administration, spatial information and governance, educational development, information infrastructure, and qualitative research skills. Professor De Vries has substantial international experience across Africa, Asia, South America, and Europe. From 2010 to 2015, he worked as an assistant professor at the University 20 in the Netherlands, specializing in geo-ICT coordination, land information infrastructure, and organizational development. Before academia, he held positions related to the land administrations and geospatial data in countries like Indonesia, Brazil, and Lithuania. That is probably a lot of things that we know about Professor Walter. In summary, Professor Walter Timo De Vries is an accomplished academic and practitioner with expertise in land administration and geospatial information management, complemented by international experience and substantial publication records. Very long list. All right, don't be surprised. Despite our guest speaking hailing from Netherlands, remember it's not from Germany. He's a true polyglot who friendly speaks 5 languages. And yes, that includes Indonesian. So ladies and gentlemen, if he chooses to present in Indonesian today, let's be ready to embrace his linguistic talents. Okay, without further delay, it is my pleasure to introduce Professor Walter Timo De Vries. The stage is yours, Professor. You may begin your presentation.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks, first of all, for the invitation. Thanks for the nice words. It's good to see your own CV sometimes back again. also a bit shocked about all the things which I did in the past. But now, thanks again for the invitation, first of all, and also for this wonderful way of organizing it. You being in Australia, it's quite interesting how things are going nowadays via Zoom. So one of the good things of all this COVID trouble that we had in the past, luckily that is over. Thanks. I would like to start. Maybe we can show my slides. I'm going to talk about land management, and for many, land management is a bit of a strange issue. Everybody's dealing with land.
Excuse me, Professor Walter, could you please make the mic just closer a little bit, please?
Oh, a little bit closer. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I was saying I'm going to speak about land management. Now, land management is a bit of a strange thing for many people because many scientific fields deal with land, including civil engineering, environmental engineering, but also politics. They deal a lot with land, and for that reason, they all have a different idea about land. My apologies, I speak in English this lecture, but if we change to Bahasa Indonesia or French or German, that's also fine, or Dutch even, that's also fine. But I'll speak in Indonesia for the moment. Let me see if the slides work. Maybe I have to put it on first. Not working yet. Yeah. Yes, the goal of today is to make the connection from land to infrastructure. So I want to talk a little bit about what, from our perspective, from the land perspective, we see as infrastructure, and then to make the link to land management interventions. So how do we change something about the land? Oh. Yes, so this is working. My apologies, it goes too quick. So at the end of the lecture, I hope you understand what I mean when I speak about land mobilization, why you do it, what are the problems with land mobilization, and also learn a little bit about how we conceptualize land mobilization and how we relate it to issues of infrastructure and problems of infrastructure. Now let's talk first of all about what land is. There's many definitions of land and of land management. And there are some ways of looking at it. And I just wanted to bring that across first so that later we understand a little bit more when we change something with land. First of all, land is viewed as something we call the terra firma, the hard soil, the earth, the crust of the earth, everything that lives and that exists on the land. And we use that term if we really want to intervene. Civil engineers like to do something with land, with hard soil. So very often they speak of land in this particular way. We change something about the actual hard soil. We build something on it, for example. But there's also another way of looking at it as physical space. Spatial planners talk about land in the way as we have to divide the land, or we have to allocate the land. That's the physical space that we have, and there's only limited physical space. If we look to the entire world, oh, it's not loud enough. If we look to the entire world and we would divide the land for everybody, there's approximately 8 billion people on this planet, and we would divide the arable land to everybody, then everybody would have approximately 50 by 50 meters of land. Now, most students would say, oh, that's a lot. My student apartment is very small, so 50 by 50 is an improvement. But if you think about the fact that you also have to use that same land for infrastructure, for buildings, for trains, for railways, for airports, then you realize that there's actually scarcity of land. Some people see land also very differently. They see it as a spiritual thing. Actually, the land does not belong to the people, actually belongs to the gods. He created the land and we are just temporary on this planet. And for that reason, we have spiritual places like mosques or churches or temples. And we should treat that with a special, in a special sense. And some people also say we have to use that land in a very special way. We cannot just subdivide or buy or sell that land. When we go to a more economic perspective, we can see land as a commodity. We buy and sell it. Typically, land ends up in budgets as an asset, for example. There is, of course, the land as an asset, but also the land as the motherland or the fatherland. We just heard the national anthem. Negriku, Tanahku is actually my land. My land. Why is Indonesia, is it land of the Indonesians? Because it's actually the community of Indonesian people that connects with that particular land. That is not the hard soil, or that is not the space, but it is the connection of a community with a certain area. When I look to Paniko here, for example, he would say he's from Padang, but actually he's not in Padang. He is here in Jakarta or in Depok, but he would still consider himself an Orang Padang. Now, why is that? Because there is a long-term community or connection with that land. So the motherland or the fatherland is a social connection rather than a physical connection. And for that reason, we also need to see land as a social issue, a property institution, we say, or as an economic property. There's a social economic affiliation with land. And for that reason, we can also see it as capital. We can invest for a long time in it, or as a consumption good. We can consume land, or we can consume from the land. If we have agriculture on the land, then basically land is not the fatherland or the motherland. It is the property with which we create economic values. And the last way to look at it, or the last two ways, is land as a human right. That you have to see as everybody has a right to live on this planet. So, yeah, you cannot be evicted from land from that. And sometimes we create new things on the land, but there are already people living there. Now, if you see land as a human right, then people who live in that area cannot simply be evicted or bring to another place. There is a human right connected to it. And some people from a legal side would argue that we have a human right to live here. It's not maybe a legal right, but we have a human right to be there. Now, if you use that perspective, then land has another meaning. And finally, we can see land as nature, as the environment. If we speak about green area or environmental, ecological values, then we speak about land in an ecological or environmental sense. So again, this is a different perspective of looking at land. And that also means that if we plan land or if we manage land, we have to make clear which perspective we are using. Is it a human right perspective? Is it the economic one? Is it the community one? Or is it the physical engineering one? Now let's connect to infrastructure. I would typically ask, what do you think is infrastructure to, and especially to civil engineers? Then typically these first couple of things come up. Infrastructure, we talk about roads, bridges, railways, waterworks, dams. These are the engineering things. Transportation engineers would say it's actually not about the hard things, but it's about mobility. It's not so much about dams or bridges or trains. No, it's actually about the connection points. So if you travel, for example, with a civil engineer from one place to another place, then a road engineer would look at the potholes in the roads and look at the asphalt. That's the professional bias. But transportation engineers would look at where can I connect from one transportation mode to another one? Or how can I get as quick as possible from one place to another? And so the issue of mobility is important. And therefore also public transport and private transport is important. From an ecological perspective, you would look at ecological corridors as infrastructure, or maybe parks or protected areas. And from a land perspective, we look at how do we develop land? How do we merge land and subdivide land for infrastructure? So here again, there's multiple ways of looking at infrastructure. So where does land connect to infrastructure? Now, it connects when we need to occupy land for new types of infrastructure. So before there was no infrastructure and now we need to allocate infrastructure, then very often we need land, or very often, always we need land. Maybe not always, sometimes you also need water. But mobilization of land is therefore referred to as the collection of land parcels or of land pieces in order to allocate land for infrastructural projects like the dams, like the corridors, like the parks, etc. And usually those infrastructural projects have a public purpose or are for a public use. Can also be for private use, but generally infrastructure projects have a public use. And that conversion itself from a current use to a new use, we typically refer to that as a land management intervention. We actually change something with the land. Its use, both in the hard form, we seal the land with asphalt, so the terra firma we change, that's the intervention. But we also change all the other aspects, the economic aspects, the human aspects, the social aspects, and the ecological aspects. Sometimes you also see the word mobilization in French literature, but there it means something else. It's actually the transfer of land that has no value to an economic value. But I will not use that particular definition of land mobilization. Here I use the conversion of private land to land for public infrastructure. Now let's look at some simple examples to make it a little bit clear. Let's say here we have a village or an area with sawas or agricultural parcels, and we decide to create a road. Then obviously the road crosses many plots of individual people or public agencies. Now immediately you see the problem. We see that you need the land from many owners that are not your own. Very often these are private owners, either legal private owners or informal private owners. In Indonesia, there's actually many types of land rights that you can have. You can have an official private right, but there can also be people simply occupying the land that do not have a certificate, but they have stayed there forever. So they have a human right actually to live on that area. And we call that an informal right. And with informal, I mean an undocumented right. The right comes from the human right, not from the legal right in this case. But you immediately see that you need to take this land, and the easiest way would simply be to design exactly where the road will be, and then to redistribute the parcels in a very meaningful way. Very often, and especially in the German context, we would call that a land consolidation project. We use the opportunity of creating infrastructure also to redistribute land and to make the land more optimally available. So we also create bigger parcels, we redistribute land rights, and we also create a more efficient way of using the land. Now that means not only a physical intervention of the space, but also a legal intervention and an intervention into individual parcels of that land itself. Now this is land mobilization connected with land consolidation immediately. Another example is if you have a local village and there is a road going through the village, maybe you want to make the road more effective. So you want to create a road that is around the village, a ring road, for example. Then again, you see that the original road crosses all sorts of parcels, and the new road actually creates a completely new structure. Now here again, you would need to acquire the land, but also redistribute the land in a different way, such that the redistribution is better, but also the connection is more efficient and more effective. Now you see again that the intervention itself creates all sorts of other changes. Not only changes in the way that you move from one place to another, so you see the infrastructure itself, but it also creates changes in a legal sense, in an ecological sense, in a social sense. People move differently from one place to another, etc. So when we look at land mobilization projects, there's many examples of that connect to infrastructure. So new roads, new railways, new waterways generally create interventions into space and into land. Generally, it leads to not only a development of the infrastructure, but a redevelopment of the entire area. You have to replace people from one place to another. You need to merge and subdivide land. You need to reallocate land rights. You need to acquire maybe new land for public green areas, for public parks. And maybe you need to have temporary allocation of land for residents who need to go from one place to another place. Now, why do we need to have mobilization of land in general? Generally, because as said, there is scarcity of land. If I just come from an area, well, I've just, this morning, we noticed already there's lots of traffic jams, but that also means there's scarcity of land. We don't have enough land for all the people in Depok. That's why they have to come from far away, and that's why we also have traffic jams. So there is a lack of effective and efficient land use. There's also a continuous expansion of urban areas. So all the time we need to acquire and remobilize land again because the cities simply grow. There's also ineffective land ownership. We saw in the first example that we have many small parcels and which could be combined into bigger parcels and more effective use. So very often there's also ineffective parcel shapes and sizes. There's also unequal land access. Some people have lots of land, other people don't have any land. Now that seems to be unequal and unfair. And yet there's also still the need for food. Food security and food sovereignty also leads to scarcity of land, and for that we need to mobilize special resources. So the solution to that is we need to find responsible and effective, yet effective, and very often also smart redistribution of land. So the interventions that we do through infrastructure should be combined with a responsible way of redistributing that land. Now, what do we need to take into account? And for that reason, I use this equation. Any land intervention is dependent on and will also create changes in lots of things. First of all, it's governance, and I'll give you some examples. There are the legal issues with the land. There are the social spatial relations, so where is it that people live? What is it what they do? Where, etc. There are the economic opportunities and dependencies. There's also the perceptions and beliefs, like land as a community. If you put a road through the community, then the way that people look at the community will also change. So perceptions will change. And the behavior itself of people will change. If you put a road, then people start to use that road. If you put an MRT, then people start to use that MRT. So people start behaving differently than they did before. So land interventions cause changes in all sorts of ways. Now let's look at some examples of the examples that I use for infrastructure development. If you create new roads or new railways, then typically you change the land itself. You seal it. You create asphalt on a place where it used to be agriculture. So land is sealed. So that will mean a reallocation or a reuse of land. Alongside with that, you need to exchange parcels. So also that physical shape will change, as well as maybe you need to restructure the parcels in size and in area. And maybe you need to subdivide and merge parcels. You need to acquire land. Now you can simply say the government simply takes the land, but it's not as easy as that. You cannot simply take the land as government. There is lots of procedures related to that. And you need to give special space to people who need to be relocated, either temporary or structurally. Now let's look at what actually changes. First of all, there is a change of governance. And governance I see as a change in power, authority, or influence. If you create a road, then suddenly you have a road authority. Somebody is responsible for that road, and somebody has authority over that road. So before there were individual owners who could decide themselves what to do with that space. Now suddenly you have both authorities, and road authorities can be private or public, or railways can be public or private, in addition to the private owners. So you create a number of authorities, and the increase of authorities creates also usually problems of authority and of responsibility. Also with redevelopment, let's say you have a road and you increase it, then you all of a sudden get more responsibilities. So if you want to discuss that, you also get a more complex way of reaching a solution or a consensus. If you want to acquire land for green areas, then you get also green authorities. Maybe the authority of Kehutanan or maybe public parks all of a sudden becomes a stakeholder in the spatial domain. And especially the reallocation for new residents also brings up the issue of housing. So you get a housing authority or a public planning authority or a spatial planning authority that comes into the question. So generally these interventions of infrastructure create sort of new stakeholders in the field and therefore also mixed power relations. What is most logical is changes in legal issues. If you simply buy the land, then you have a transaction of the land. You get a new certificate. So the new authorities get a new certificate. But if there are informal settlers, occupiers of the land, then you have a legal issue. If you cannot expropriate them simply with public domain acquires the land with an expropriation law. No, because they don't have a legal right, but they have a sort of human right to live in that area. They have to live somewhere. So people could even go to court in that case if they don't want to be evicted. And very often a judge will also say, well, you have a certain time to find another place for yourself, or you get a certain amount of money to get another place. But still, you need to acquire those informal rights or non-documented rights. You need to deal with that. A redevelopment often leads also to new restrictions and new types of rights. If you have a road, you have a right to use all of a sudden. and you have a right of access, whereas before you did not have a right to access. Private property is excluding access to non-property owners. So with introducing a use right with public access, you introduce also a new access rights. Now that is a new type of right which you create. Acquisition for green goes through what we call the eminent domain for public goods. So in order to justify an intervention in land for public infrastructure, you need to justify it for a public good. You need to go in many countries to a democratic decision that decides, okay, here we have a road, and for that reason, the government can now intervene into private space. Now, that is a bit different in some countries. In countries where the government is very strong and authoritative, they can acquire easily. In countries like Germany, it's very difficult for the government to acquire land, even for the public purpose. It requires lots of procedures at all levels. So expropriation in Germany hardly ever occurs because people will protest or reject it very simply. So rights will also change. The social spatial relations will also change. When we introduce a new MRT or LRT, then people start behaving differently and also maybe residing in a different place. We can actually reside much further away. Then we don't need to live close to the office anymore, because we know that we can, with an MRT or LRT, get to the location very quickly. So generally, you see that introduction of infrastructure also leads or creates urban expansion, because people can live further away, or maybe they move closer to the public infrastructure in that case. In Germany, we see that we have so-called S-Bahns, which is the German way of MRTs, that many people want to live very close to S-Bahn stations. So the MRT stations, and then you get concentration of habitants close to stations, a kind of transit-oriented development, but that is happening informally rather than formally. So even if it's not planned, people will start to behave, and that has social spatial effects. People are moving and they occupy space. So you see very often with that land intervention, a change of both people and occupation of space. Then there are the economic opportunities, obviously, that change. If you have new infrastructure, then you can get quicker to certain areas. Locations, I just came this morning or yesterday evening, I came from Cikarang. Cikarang is a bit Bekasi and then Cikarang, if you go from Jakarta. And on that road, you see a lot of factories. Now, those factories are there because they occupy land that was cheaper than in Jakarta itself. So those economic opportunities, those new factories also need new workers. And for that reason, you see economic opportunities, developments close to where economy is happening. So that occupies space and that occupies land. So simply having a road to that area will create new economic opportunities, and therefore will also create new businesses in those areas. Then there is the perception. If you go to a new area, then you connect to that area as well. If a new town is created, then very often you don't have any connection. If we create, for example, the new IKN, the new capital city, there's nobody that says immediately, oh, I'm a resident of the IKN. We are still Orang Padang, but nobody says I'm Orang IKN or Orang Nusantara. So the connection to that area takes some time. So that for that reason, you have to influence, or you have to take care also of the perception. How do we identify with certain areas? And that is very often in the perceptions and beliefs. Another stream of thought is ecological perceptions. Very often, or nowadays, more people are aware of the need to be environmentally friendly, but that's also, it creates some time to change that belief that that is important, so that you take care of green areas and that you include that into land planning and land management. And finally, behavior. Do we actually change our behavior with infrastructure? That's a major question. If we in the beginning, when the buses, the public buses were created here, the Transjakarta buses, then nobody made use of that. And now I see those buses are full. So behavior has changed over time. So and that has an influence on the use of the infrastructure, but also the use of the land. If more people make use of the Transjakarta bus, then you also see that people move, behave differently close to the areas where they get on those buses or where they get off the buses. I think that's important. Now let's take a very simple example. We tried this system, and this is a thesis that has just been finished in an island of Jamaica. Many people know Jamaica. I don't know. I hope many people know the country of Jamaica. It's in the Caribbean. It's very famous for the music, of course. It's also famous for the runners. The fastest runners are from Jamaica. But it's actually a very small island. It's an island that is as big, I tried to look for an island similar in Indonesia. It is as big as Bangka, more or less. So it's much smaller than Java. It's even smaller than most of the islands in Indonesia. It's as big as Bangka from Sumatra. And yet many famous runners from there. But there the issue was also, we want to create a new highway. They have a highway in the southern area, and they now create a new highway, or they have created a new highway along the coast of the northern area. And we wanted to know, what did that intervention change in terms of all those changes that I've just highlighted? And that's the thesis that was investigated. And I wanted to show you as an example of how we can make use of this type of equation. So what we're saying is that new road designs or new infrastructure designs influences lots of changes in all these things: governance, legal issues, social spatial issues, etc. And then also there will be a sort of iterative effect. It will also create new demands and needs for new roads designs. If people start to behave differently, if authorities become different, then automatically you also get new infrastructure demands and needs again. So this is what we wanted to investigate. Now, in order to investigate, we took a small area, a sample area of that entire road. You have to imagine that road is all along the coast, the northern part of the island. And we took a small area to investigate what actually happened there. Did those changes emerge, yes or no? And we took that sample area along that highway using lots of data from that area. Most of the data were collected with geographic information systems, with remote sensing, and also collection of statistical data, interviews, surveys, in order to get a rich picture of what actually changes along with the development of the highway. Now let's look in more detail. What actually changed in power? Well, first of all, the highway was constructed in a public-private partnership arrangement, something which also happens here a lot in Indonesia. Now that means that private agencies get authorities over the highway. We see here, for example, in a lot of Indonesia that you have the toll roads. Now, toll roads have authorities, and they also collect money, and they also have a business model. That means that they have a certain interest And with an economic interest also comes a power and authority relation that is introduced. Now, this is on the one hand clear, but it also increases the number of responsibilities. If you want to have a negotiation with the development of that area, you must include those owners and those responsible parties. You cannot simply ignore them anymore, whereas before you could do it. The private company or the private companies were actually not from Jamaica itself. One came from Argentina and one came from the United States. Now that also means that you introduce foreign authorities in your own country. I see here, for example, Chinese contractors for the railways. Well, that also means that you get Chinese authorities partly here because they make contracts. So you have to deal with international law in that case, and also making clear what the responsibilities are going to be. And during the interviews, it became very clear that when we asked, okay, what is still the power of the government to make any decision, then many people argued, yeah, the government no longer has any authority. It's actually the private company that has the authority what to do with that area. So you see a kind of privatization of governance in the area emerging. In a way similar to the area that I was just mentioning in Cikarang. Many people know Lipo Cikarang, but the location is actually called the Kecamatan of Cikarang and not Lipo Bank. But many people associate it with the bank because the authority is now with the bank and no longer, or the effective authority, and no longer with the local government, or to a much lesser extent. So you see a kind of privatization of spatial land management. The authority that the government still have is acquisition of land. They still can acquire, expropriate land. That is what they can do. And they can also decide on the designs. So authority is not completely gone because there's still some authority of the governance, but people perceive it as a change of authority. The private company has taken over in our area. Very often that perception persists. In terms of legal relations, there is, of course, similar to Indonesia, there is a Land Acquisition Act. Government has the right to acquire that land. And in this case, it was relatively easy because part of the land was already owned by one or more governmental levels. So part of the land could be easily acquired, but there were also, in this sample area, there were land owned by private owners, by agriculturalists, by farmers. Now that land needs to be acquired for public usage. Now that resulted in negotiations, or for which price do we want to buy it, and compensate. Either they get compensated in the form of or in the form of money. But in that process, sometimes the landowners would wait for a long time because they know that the longer they wait, the higher the value of their land will become. If you're the only farmer that didn't sell their land, and for that reason, the contractor cannot finish the road, then the value of that land goes up, so that farmer can ask a higher price or a higher compensation. So you see that in the process, although the right exists to acquire, also the economic opportunities, they go up. So here is ultimately a reconstruction of the rights. You need to create one big parcel or a collection of many parcels whereby the road owner has the particular right. Oh, the slides here went off. I'm not sure if everybody can see the slides online.
Yes, you can see it.
You can still see it online.
Yes.
Just can't see it. Okay, we're back in action. The social if you create a new road, then you get also an anticipation of people. People start to move, as I said, closer to the road or closer to the access points of the road. And this is a process that we can also see through space or in space with remote sensing. Here are indeed two images. One is from 1999, before the road was constructed, and one was one after the road was constructed. And you clearly see patterns of residential areas and of built-up areas changed, closer to the road and along the road. So economic opportunities changed, but also social spatial relations have changed. And we can also see that from the property values. When we compare the property values of the parcels along the road as compared to property increases far away from the road, we see on the upper part, we see close to the road, the property values went up with more than 600%, and far away from the roads, the property values went up with 400%. So in general, property values go up, which is a general trend, but close to the road, they go up much faster than they go far away from the road. So simply in the anticipation of the road construction, we see already property values going up, and after that, definitely going up. So economic change. And we can also see that in patterns of poverty. So when I say economic dependencies, there are also opportunities. Here we have two maps of poverty prevalence. So where are the poorest people in society? Before that was spread in multiple areas, and now we see poverty prevalence only in one particular area. So along the road, poverty values of people with lower incomes has gone down. So there is an economic development closer to the road. We can prove that. Change in perceptions. That was actually perceptions on what people thought about the road. Is it good for us or is it bad for us? Now, generally, people responded that they believed that the road was bad for the environment. Many trucks, many new cars on that road, so it will be bad for the environment. But when they were asked, okay, do you think it's a good thing economically? Many people perceived it as something positive. So the ability to earn something with that road or through that road, that perception went up. A change in behavior. Now, this is a little bit difficult to see, but we could see that where people were likely to live or where people were likely to move, that definitely changed. So, yeah, these figures are perhaps not so clear, but maybe the next slide is a bit clearer. The area where people move to, and the area of the road is Saint Anne, so that is halfway on that table, on that Paris. There's actually an increase of people that move to that area. So we see definitely people that move away or move to that area is increasing, whereas people are moving away from the capital city, Kingston in this case, is actually increasing. So there is a change of behavior of the people. People are willing to move further away from the capital city, even if they work in the capital city in this case. So if we combine all that, then we can definitely prove that the intervention of the infrastructure caused all sorts of changes. There were changes in governance, the responsibilities changed. The legal changes were not so big. The government didn't need to acquire so much land because they had a lot of land. Economic opportunities changed in various ways. But the biggest change were actually in the social spatial relations. People anticipate to a new infrastructure and they also react to a new infrastructure. So that is a major change that we see. So the overall change is definitely visible, and that is something that we need to be aware of if we talk about the effect of infrastructure on land management, or the effect of a land management intervention on multiple aspects of land and space. Now, as a last issue, my plan is to use the same for a major intervention in Indonesia. So the major logic of the equation for a major intervention in Indonesia, moving the capital from Jakarta to the IKN, Ibu Kota Negara, or Nusantara, as it's also referred to. And actually, what I would like to do is to investigate the complexities that will happen with that new area. That's a new study that we are investigating. You probably know that change from Jakarta to the area close to Balikpapan, more or less in the center of the country. And one of the justifications is that Jakarta is too overcrowded and there's too many problems in Jakarta. But actually, the problems of Jakarta are not really addressed per se in this case. And for that reason, the intervention is a major intervention into space. So I see that from the land management perspective as an intervention in land and an intervention in space. Before, there was relatively simple space and land use, in this case, predominantly used for forestry, either natural forest or protected forest or timber harvesting. And now it is converted into residential housing, infrastructure, and lots of other uses, industry, etc. And the question that I have for you is, how will that change the environment? So what are the effects also using that same formula? The actual situation hasn't changed much, so the ideas are much there, and these are pictures of 2 or 3 years ago. At that time, nothing was built. This is what the IKN area looked like. But the question is, and that would be a question for you to think about and to study also further, what are the issues here in terms of land mobilization? What do we need to mobilize? And what are the effects or potential effects? I don't see the chat. I'm not sure if there's any space for chatting, but that can come afterwards. That would be an assignment for all of you that is listening. What are the changes in terms of governance, legal issues, social spatial issues, economic issues, perception, and behavior? One of the things that I said already in terms of perception is the identity. Who actually identifies with that new capital? I think that is a major issue. I say that because if you don't identify with an area, then you also don't feel responsible. People feel responsible for their home because they identify with their home, but if they don't identify with that area, then people don't feel responsible. So it's important that identity and perception also changes in the course of time in order to make sure that the development goes in the right direction. So this is a small assignment which I'd like to give to you, and maybe also for further research we like to do. I would just give you this to conclude my presentation. I think that the change in the new capital or the construction generally of new villages will be accompanied with both regulated growth and unregulated growth. So what you'll see is that in terms of cabinets, there is indeed a new government authority introduced that has the responsibility. It will attract new developers.
Lagi yang kali juga
Very will get new developers in that area that start to develop that city, and therefore also unregulated or unplanned growth will take place, which will lead automatically to mixed responsibilities and mixed authorities. And for that reason, it will lead to responsibility contests, or other ways put, there may be conflicts of authorities at some point in time. Also, local people or people that live close to the area, people from the surrounding kabupatens, kecamatan's, they will also say, hey, wait a minute, this was my kecamatan, this was my kabupaten, we had a plan for that. So it's very likely that there will be some sort of contest. We planned here, for example, the use of water or drinking water or wastewater. That will lead to a contest. So this is something you can predict already, if that is not taken care of properly. In terms of legal relations, I would predict you get land ownership contests or problems. There was a land use plan for that entire area. The two kabupatens actually had a land use plan, and also the province of East Kalimantan had a land use plan. Now you need to create new land use plans. Now, is that still in line with the old ones? You may also get a conflict of traditional land rights. People that say, this was my original land. I am orang asli, or versus, okay, this is public land. So this generally creates conflicts. And I know from other areas in Indonesia, this may lead to some sort of struggles. So if you don't manage that properly, yeah, that will last for a long time. Also, in terms of social spatial development, cities, they don't develop very often in a concentric way. Many cities in Indonesia, they develop in a ribbon way. They develop along roads. So if you start to create roads, then automatically you get settlements and industry starting to occupy land close to the roads, and not in a concentric way, like a circle, small circle, bigger circles, bigger circles. So it's very likely that you also get in this area ribbon development, but that would mean that the city would develop along the roads, which in fact go into the neighboring cities. So the roads to Balikpapan and Samarinda. So you occupy that land, and maybe also to the forest areas. So again, if you don't manage that properly, you may get conflicts of land rights and land use rights. Economically, yeah, who are actually the economic partners that will develop? Some people are very critical. They say all the rich people will move to the capital city and all the poor people will remain in Jakarta. Now, is that true? Or will there be an equal and fair development in that area? Now, this is something to investigate. I cannot predict that, but I know from other cities, new cities, that very often the big developers will start first, and then private individual people will invest later. So again, a fair distribution of economic development is important. And last, the perceptions and the beliefs. I think it's important that you deal with identity contests, as I call it. On the one hand, a new capital city has to unify the entire country. But yeah, that also means that all the people need to be represented in that place, and there needs to be a connection to that capital city. Now people identify with Jakarta. Oh, I'm orang Jakarta. Or I was born and raised in Jakarta. Now that feeling needs to be established as well, and at the same time there needs to be a connection with the rest of the country, that there is not an isolated development of that place. So these are some of the things that, from the logic of the studies that we've done, may emerge in this particular case. But this is something that that obviously we need to investigate, and I'm quite happy to do that together with all of you, and also together with our students from the Technical University of Munich. Good. That was it from my side. I hope it made some sense and that I spoke not too quick for you. I forget my own speed, but I'm quite happy to get into a discussion on maybe on these issues, on the examples that I mentioned, but maybe also on other issues that you can relate to. Thank you very much, and also thank you for listening.
Okay, thank you, Professor Fries. It's very interesting presentations. And it's been going on now. If we see news in the last few days, and you mentioned about ownership of land, which is a very gray area. If you look at from human rights perspective and legal perspective in Indonesian society, that's we call it as a gray area. So it's very critical and potentially become a conflict between the governments and these the people. And there has been going on evictions in Rempang, Batam in the last few days. So you can see there's a lot of social upheaval over there, and people protest on the streets, and as the police comes, and well, the situation is basically the same. You know, this is about the gray area between human rights perspective and legal perspective. In Australia, we have kind of a human rights, we formalize that kind of law to become traditional landowner, which is, you know, upheld very high by society in here. And there is no breaching or whatever, but we have to preserve that kind of traditional landowner. But in Indonesia, it's a little bit, you know, wobbly in this sense. And that's probably part of the thing that we need to discuss further. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, after Professor Fries' presentation, it's now time for Q&A sessions. I'd like to invite our audience to participate by raising your hand if you have any questions. If you are joining via Zoom, please click the hand raise button on your Zoom screen to let us know that you have a question, or write something on the chat page. And for those who here in the rooms, you can simply raise your hand and ask question directly to Professor Walter. Okay, anyone would like to be the first? Please raise your hand, or the second. And there is one question from Mary in the chat box. Probably, Mary, would you like to ask directly your questions? Because it's quite long questions. Are you there, Mary? Hello?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, would you like to ask directly to Professor Walter?
Okay. Hi, Professor Walter. Good morning. Nice to see you in Zoom. And so happy you at Pancasila University. Thank you for come. And then thank you for the presentation. I'm so happy because I get your knowledge from you directly. First question, in Jakarta, so many cluster housing developments, and maybe just below 5% to buy that houses. An average of 1 until to 5 houses, because they don't sell the houses well. So the land cannot be utilized optimally. The question is how entrepreneurs or developers use the land according to its function and still get the benefits because the house already built. And the second question, can you tell us about the integration of the land system, how land still manage even though the government changed? Because the land management planning is still current. Thank you, Mr. Wahyu.
Okay. Professor Fries, would you like to
Yes, two
comment on this
two
directly?
very prominent and important questions. If I understand your questions rightly, first is if a developer builds something and then it's not used, what can you still do with it? And the second question is about the, sorry, I forgot that already, about
The integration of the land system, how land is managed, even though the government
if the government changes.
change, yes.
Yeah. Let me come back to the first one. This is a difficult one. To give you another example, I've been in Cikarang for a number of days, and that's why I can give those examples. In Cikarang, they developed an area called Meikarta. Meikarta was supposed to have, like, if I'm not mistaken, 28 towers of apartments and lots of facilities. Up to now, something like 10 or 12 have been built, and all those buildings are empty because of some sort of problem. So now we see empty structures in that area which are not used. Now the question is, what can you do with that? And that is something that happens very often. So the construction has started, and then for one or another reason, the money is finished, or maybe it was not legal, actually, what they did, or there was some corruption. So what can you do? Now, there's actually only two or three strategies. One is that another developer takes over and continues that. But then obviously the original developer wants their money back or some sort of compensation. Another strategy would be to destroy everything and make a new plan, destroy everything. But then also the developer wants to have some compensation, and very often the new developer doesn't want to give that. And the third option is sort of a middle ground where you go into a kind of land readjustment or land consolidation. You try to, and that is sort of, I would almost say that is the German or the Japanese kind of solution, is to form a community or an association of residents and multiple stakeholders in the area, people that have a direct benefit and also have a direct effect of the development, and form a consortium in order to redevelop that land together and also take joint responsibility for that. So the advantage of that solution is that you have multiple people that take responsibility. So you share the risk over multiple parties and stakeholders, but you also share the responsibilities among multiple stakeholders, so that people are more willing to take care of that property, even if it goes in the wrong way. So there is more people that have a direct interest into it. And then you form some sort of also association that ultimately decides, okay, what can we do with which part of that property? I would also advise to make a strategy of multifunctional use of space. We see that a single use of space often leads to high risks. If you say, I only use it for residential areas, and then you don't have residents, or the apartment is too expensive, then you lose all your investment. So make sure you have not only residential space, but also maybe a co-working space, place where people can work together. or create small and medium enterprises that want to occupy a certain space. So generally, these are some strategies that you can use with these properties. Yeah, so a joint land readjustment and property readjustment strategy, that would be the answer for your first question. The second question, if the government changes, it doesn't mean that their decisions have changed. Decisions may still be there. If you have a land use plan, then usually you plan for 5 or 10 years, or maybe even for longer years. So the decisions may not change with the change of the government. But nevertheless, a new government can make other decisions. That's true. But that's the risk of living in a democracy, I guess. That is the effect. Yeah. So yeah, not an easy answer, but I guess that's the way it is. Yeah. The trade-off, so to speak. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Vries, for the answer. Well, I think this is the things that the situation in Indonesia is heating up, because of the presidential elections, well, including the IKN, of course. Like you just mentioned, change the government might change the policy. And then you probably mentioned that the policy is still be there. But in Indonesia, that's become big issues because some people think that if we change the government, the IKN project might be stopped. I don't know. This is a very, very political things, but okay, very interesting.
Maybe
And
to the question,
yes.
Do you think, maybe for Ibu Mary, do you think the IKN will stop, or just as a question?
It's depend on commitment governments.
Okay.
With the government.
Okay. Thanks for that honest answer. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. We got another questions now from Bapak Andi Muhammad Yasser Hakim. Are you there, Pak Muhammad? Pak Andi?
Yeah.
Hello, Pak Andi.
Hello.
Yes, Pak Andi, would you like to address your question directly to Professor Walter?
Yeah. Can you hear my voice?
Yes, sure.
Okay. Thank you. Good morning, Prof. Walter. Thank you for the chance. My name is Andi Muhammad Yasser Hakim. I'm from National Research and Innovation Agency, BRIN. It's such a good presentation of you. So let me ask you a question. As we know that every resources in this earth, especially natural resources, has its thresholds, and many methods have been explained related to the calculation of its carrying capacity, such as water carrying capacity and green carrying capacity, and etc. And in terms of infrastructure, or the form of it is build-up land or build-up area, how can we measure its capacity? So this is the opposite. How much percentage of build-up area should be limited in a city scale to achieve balance and sustainability? Thank you.
Yes, good question. So carrying capacity, I translate your question, how much can a city grow, or can they actually handle? That's a good question.
Yes, like the boundary, urban growth boundary.
Yes, urban growth boundary. How far can we extend, and what sort of strategies can we do? In my opinion, it's always a trade-off. It depends on what you're willing to accept. So a general strategy for avoiding that the city expands too much, there's actually 3 or 4 strategies to do that. One strategy is the compact city strategy. So to make sure that you don't expand beyond the boundaries, but you densify, so you make everything closer to each other. Now the trade-off for that is that obviously people live closer to each other, or you have to build high-rise, and the areas of industry and residential areas will also be closer to each other. So, or you have to divide the space very carefully. Another strategy is to occupy water areas. So instead of occupying land areas, you occupy water areas. So it's either in the lakes, which you reclaim, or you expand like Singapore or Dubai or the Netherlands for that matter, you expand into the sea. So you build land on the sea, reclamation areas. Now that's very nice. Then you have a bigger city, but again, the trade-off is that very often that goes along with very often that goes along with lots of environmental problems. Another strategy is to make sure that you have relocation of people. So instead of people moving to the areas, you make other areas outside of the city more attractive. So you say to people from Jakarta, wait a minute, here in Cirebon, it's actually much nicer to live there. So we give you either a bonus or we make it very attractive for you to move to Cirebon, for example. And there you, so you give kind of an incentive of people to move away so that the city can carry the amount of, or that the carrying capacity is distributed over multiple places. But again, the trade-off there is that you relieve the problems of Jakarta, but you introduce new problems in another area. So for all the solutions that you can think of to deal with the carrying capacity or to deal with the land scarcity, there's always a trade-off. The compact city is very often promoted, but one of the biggest effects of compact city strategies is very often an increase of land and property values. So if everything becomes more dense, then you cannot afford a house or a building anymore. So then you are forced to move outside of the city. And so it leads to the opposite effects of the compact city, in fact. So, yeah. The question is, how do we balance the trade-off? What sort of negative effect are we still willing to accept to get the positive effect of that particular strategy? I think that is, and that's the biggest challenge for land use planners in general, and for land managers for that matter as well. Yeah. So there's not a straight answer to your question, but just a sort of academic answer.
So
did that answer your question, or were you thinking of something else?
yeah, I mean, so do you think that vertical building or mixed land use is appropriate in Indonesia? In
What
case
do I
of,
think about land expropriation? Is that the question?
sorry?
Was your question about expropriation, or?
I mean, the complexity, as you mentioned, that complexity is one of the solution that we can apply for that case. So do you think that vertical building or mixed land use it's appropriate in Indonesia, in case of Indonesia, like Jakarta, maybe?
Yes and no. I am not necessarily a fan of vertical buildings, unless it is for residential buildings in certain areas. I mean, the whole identity of the area is affected by vertical buildings, of course. And vertical buildings, I think one of the problems is also that people are not aware of how much water and energy those vertical buildings require. So a lot of water, for example, drinking water is coming from groundwater. So if you have a lot of vertical buildings, then you extract a lot of groundwater, and that may result in a lot of other problems. So again, you have a kind of trade-off. But I am a fan of densification. And I'm also a fan of or I think there's more solutions to be found in the development of rural areas to make sort of other areas more attractive, and to also make people aware it doesn't matter if you stay far away from Jakarta. Actually, you can have a good life outside of Jakarta, maybe even a better one. So I think I'm more a fan of a distribution than of pure densification to make only high rise.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Maybe you mentioned one case like occupy the water area. I mean, it's the issue in Indonesia. Reclamation is one of the biggest issue in Indonesia. So it depends on the regulation. It's not allowed here, like the occupation of occupy the water area, like reclamation for the sea or like the lake. For your information.
Yeah, reclamation. If you start to reclaim lakes, I'm not a fan of that, because lakes have multiple purposes. They generally serve, they have an ecological service value, so there's ecological value in it, but there's also touristic value and quality of life value in lakes. So if you start to build houses, and for example, pump out the lakes and then to start to build houses, I would not recommend that at all. We've seen the effects of that in many other cities, and generally they also lead to more climate effects. They make the city hotter. So lakes also have a function of keeping the heat. So, but reclamation outside in the sea is not necessarily bad if it is done properly, if it is not destroying mangrove areas on the coast. So if it's done wisely, that could be a solution for certain areas, definitely. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Pak Andi. Thank you. We still got two questions. Please, Aulia Alfania. Are you there, Aulia?
Yes, sir.
Okay, go ahead. Yes, Aulia, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, would you like to address directly your questions? Hello?
Yeah.
Well, you want to ask directly, or you want me to just pass your question?
I'm gonna ask my question.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Good morning, Professor. So my question is, what is the impact of urbanization of land use pattern and infrastructure development, and how to fix it? That's it. Thank you.
So the question is, what is the effect of urbanization on land use patterns in the city or outside of the city?
Aulia, in the city or in the urban area?
Sorry, what?
This in the city, you're talking about the impact of urbanization in the city, right? In the
Yes.
city? Okay, in the city.
Yes. Well, maybe I should say there's various theories of urbanization. Very often what people think about urbanization is just expanding the city beyond the city boundaries. So converting rural land, non-urban rural land, to urban land, and therefore making it part of the city. The same way the Depok before was an independent, separate village, and now it became part of Jakarta or Jabodetabek for that reason. So Jakarta has urbanized or has converted the land close and around Depok into urban land. But you can also see urbanization as a form of a change of activities and a change of behavior. So some people would refer to, for example, mining industry or extraction industry, where you extract oil. They would also consider that an urban activity. So even though it's in a very remote area, all the activities and sort of the capital that is related to that activity is very urbanized. Everything that relates to capital. That's why I was saying you have to define land in various ways. So from the economic perspective, a mining area is an urban area, but maybe from a spatial or geographical perspective, it's still a very rural area because there's many farmers. So urbanization you can see in many ways. Generally, what you see with the first definition of urbanization is that a lot of land is converted despite the will of the people that live there. So a farmer may live in a rural area doing farmer activities, and suddenly he or she is surrounded by big buildings, and suddenly the farmer becomes an urban resident. And for that reason doesn't connect to that area anymore. Now that is a big social effect, which is very often not taken into account and also misunderstood. They just said, well, a farmer is always more happy with urban activities, but that's not the case. And vice versa. Urban residents do not always want to live in big apartments or do not always want to live in the center, on the outskirts of the city. So urbanization depends or happens in many ways. And I think it's important to see, first of all, what are the effects for the people who are affected? And secondly, are the people also co-deciding on what changes for them? I think that is an important aspect which I think we need to take into account. That is maybe a typical German philosophy, I would say, making sure that you make the decisions together with the people that are affected. But I think it helps for the sustainability and sort of maintaining the area and keeping people happy about what happens with the area and not getting unintended effects. I think that is what is important in these urbanization questions. Sorry, I took a little bit of a different part, but I was trying to give you an answer to your question.
Okay, thank you for the answers, and probably we can discuss this further, but due to time constraint, we have to make it concise. Nadia Putri Azara. Hello, are you there, Nadia? Hello, Nadia. We got a few coming. Nadia? How about this, the next one? Hardianto Aryo Brata.
Yes.
Who's this? Hardianto, right? Hardiarto.
Yes.
Yes, okay. Can you please ask directly?
First of all, thank you for Professor Walter for giving us the lecture this morning. My name is Brata, and my question is, what are the risks of building an infrastructure near a human settlement or area, and how do we get their trust to build the infrastructure? Because many places in Jakarta were built by an infrastructure near a human area, like for example Cipete Raya, where there's a business district building, and people like always get the risk of traffic jam and maybe like the water resource and etc. Thank you.
Yeah, a good question. I think there's always risks in building new infrastructure, and you're absolutely right. If you build a new road or a new railway, it will create a change in behavior, and it will have some effects. Now, one of those behavior is indeed more cars or more trucks, and that will have an effect, like an environmental negative effect or an externality, we could say. But I guess you need to take that into account once you plan these things. Maybe the problem lies there more than just seeing what the effects will be. Maybe you need to make more scenarios of the effects that will arise and take that into account in your planning process, and then make the trade-offs. If we make this choice, then these are the effects. Then ask the people or the ones responsible, do we want to accept that kind of effect or not? Is that an effect that we want to carry as a community, yes or no? That's always, yeah, that is the risk, but that's also the process, I would say. So make scenarios, make evaluations of possible impacts, and on the basis of those types of information, then make your decision.
Okay, thank you, Professor Walters. And
Thank you,
then
Professor Walter.
Mas Didit, Pak Didit.
Yeah, hello.
Yes, hello, Didit.
Yeah, hello.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Wahyu. Hello, Professor Timo. So please introduce myself. I'm from Atmajaya, Jakarta, and my name is Didit. So I think I have small questions here, and it's a common questions. According to, this is for the youngsters, just like us. So the questions here is that how can the younger generations of civil engineers be effectively prepared to contribute to the resilience and disaster preparedness of infrastructure projects, integrate emerging technologies for sustainable development, and conduct robust monitoring and evaluation? And what collaborative efforts between educational institutions, government bodies, and private companies are essential to create job opportunities and facilitate this preparation? So I think it's a common questions, but in my opinion, it's quite important for us to know the detailed mindset or point of view from you as a professor. Okay.
Yes, I understand where you're coming from. If you're saying, okay, we are studying here, what are we studying for? If we want to make a contribution to society. In general, and maybe you're not so happy with the question, but in general, the effects of graduates are usually only visible after maybe 10 to 15 years after you complete your study. That's a bad answer, of course, because then usually graduates come into positions where they can actually make decisions and where they are not just executives of a plan. But if you want to be earlier in that process, I would say try to be proactive in all sorts of projects, either as an advocate of a particular idea of your community, for example. In the past, when I first came to Indonesia, there was always gotong royong. I don't know if that still exists, but these were small projects where people from a community work together to clean up a certain area, to improve certain areas. Now try to participate in these kind of activities, and from experience, then try to find out, okay, what are the major problems here, which I see as a civil engineer. So what are the problems with water? What are the problems with construction? What are the problems with maintenance of infrastructure? These kind of things. And I think by getting engaged in that, you get a much better perspective of what you can decide later for bigger areas. You get a better feeling for that. When I got my first job after graduation, I learned the theory, but I didn't know the practice. So it was very important for me to stand on the ground and do the things myself and be responsible for that in order to see the effects of those sort of interventions. So the earlier you engage in these sort of activities, the better. So either as a public citizen or as a student who wants to do smaller projects, internships, I would encourage you to get involved proactively. I think that is my advice. Yeah. We usually see, and we make a forecast also in our universities, what is the effect of our education? And in projects, you can say, okay, we see the effects after 1 or 2 years. But in education, we only see the effects after 10 to 15 years, because then people are really in positions where they lead projects or manage projects or get certain responsibilities. That's unfortunately the way it is. Unless you come with a very good project. For resilience, maybe just to give you an example, from the environmental front, there are some people that try to clean up the plastic in the water, for example. Now, this is a community project that you can easily start, and you can also contribute as a civil engineer. How do we actually do that with engineering knowledge? So these kind of things you can start immediately. I hope that gives you some motivation.
Okay, thank you. Due to the time constraints, we have to limit the questions, but we still got 2 of them, Professor, and hopefully we can manage to answer this one in a very short times. Taufik.
Yes, Pak Wahyu.
Yes, you can ask directly. Taufik.
Great presentation, Prof. Timo. My name is Muhammad Taufik Rahman and from Real Universitas Pancasila. Allow me to ask questions. How do land use and infrastructure choices impact water resource management, including issues related to stormwater runoff, water quality, and flood risk mitigation? And how can sustainable water practices be integrated? As we know that some parts of IKN also in a valley. Thank you.
I didn't get your question 100%, but I heard some issues on water quality and also in the IKN area. Is that correct?
Yes, in that correct.
Yeah, at this moment, right away, we have 2 students from our university are doing research in the IKN area about water. One is working on drinking water scenarios, and the other one is working on wastewater scenarios. Well, first of all, wastewater is a big problem in urban areas in general. What do you do with wastewater? Where does it go? Where do you clean it up? Where do you get it back into the water management circle, so to speak? I think that is an area. And the other one, drinking water. How much drinking water do you actually need, for example, and where do you get it from? Do you get it from the neighborhood? Do you import it? Now, these are things that we're trying to research. It depends, of course, of the demand. And for the IKN, we have 3 scenarios, basically. It is either a very rapid development, like you see in Jakarta or in major cities. Basically, you can say it is a development out of control, so unplanned. The other extreme is a very slow development. Nothing happens for a long time. And there is an in-between development, a sort of manageable development. Now, I think we have started in our studies with those 3 scenarios. And for each of those scenarios, we make a prediction of what are the demands in terms of water quality, in terms of drinking water, and in terms of wastewater. And what do you then need to develop? So that's how we approach that particular issue in a sort of rational way. These are scenario 1, scenario 2, scenario 3, and then we compare what is it that we need and what is it that we have at this moment. So what is it that we need to develop? But that's all we can offer at this moment. At the same time, you need to monitor very carefully what is happening with the development, both informal developments as well as formal developments. And by that I mean the formal development is what the government decides, but the informal development is already taking place. Certain people are already moving there, developing companies, the Lippos and the Delta Mas and all the big development companies, they're already investing in that area. So factories are already investing in that area. These are developments that are behind the scenes. Now, this is something that you need to find out what is happening in order to make your scenario more realistic. I think this is, but this is an ongoing research. So if you're interested, you're welcome to join.
Good.
Okay, then I'm happy glad to join the research and see the result of it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The last questions, please, Ibu Andini Rosalina. Ibu Andini, are you there? Ibu Andini?
Yes, sir. Thanks for
Okay.
giving me the time to ask my question. So, my question is how to deal with the environment with the increasing number of infrastructure development plans, because even now, development that is still far from planning has many negative impact on the environment, while land for reforestation now is hard to find, especially in Jakarta, because Jakarta is the center of our country. Thanks.
Yes, I would like almost to turn the question back to you. What do you think should happen? Because I, as an outsider, of course, I can say many things, but I see that many of the. What do you think should happen to make the environment better? I'd like to hear your opinion.
Okay. Yeah, those are very interesting questions, and then we need to discuss it in other topic, probably other times. But
maybe if we have more time.
Yeah. Thank you for those questions. And then if you still have any questions, please write down, and then we're going to answer that, or we're going to pass your questions to Professor Walters, and probably we can answer those questions by email or something. Thank you, everyone. Okay, time is stepping, suggesting that we have to wrap up this public lecture. In conclusions, our speaker profound insights have broadened our horizons on land use and management. We extend our heartfelt gratitude for today's enlightening presentations. Thank you. Probably I need to summarize a little bit what has been presented. Today, the presentation highlights that land mobilization goes beyond legal land conversions, affecting governance, legal systems, social dynamic, economic relations, perceptions, and behavior across all intervention phases. Further comparative research is needed, I think, to assess how countries employ legal tools for land mobilization and how these processes impact perception and behavior. Understanding this dynamic is crucial for managing social economic changes during the land mobilizations. So it's a very interesting topic. Now it's time to conclude these public lectures. On behalf of the School of Infrastructure and Environmental Engineering, the School of Civil Engineering, and the School of Architecture at Pancasila University, we extend our sincere gratitude to Professor Walter Timo De Vries for his enlightening talk. Let's give a round of applause to Professor Walter Timo De Vries. Before we conclude, we would like also to thanks to all attendees, whether you are here in person or joining us online from various parts of Indonesia and around the world. Your presence today is greatly appreciated. We hope to have the opportunity to meet you again in the near future. Thank you. And now I will return the microphone to the host. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Wahyu. Before we conclude our event, first we would like to give the presentation of certificate to the speaker by the head of the Infrastructure and Environmental Engineering Study Program, Dr. Insinyur Ati Tri Juniarti to Professor Tim. Please share the certificate.
Thank you, Professor Walter Timo De Vries, that already being with us today. Give your lecture. That this is very memorable for all of us. Thank you so much. Please accept our certificate for you. Yes.
Okay. Next is the presentation of certificates to the moderator by the Secretary of the Infrastructure and Environmental Engineering Study Program, Dr. I. Nyoman Teguh Prasida, STMT, to Mr. Wahyu.
Thank you very much, Pak Wahyu. As the moderator for this public lecture, this is the certificate of our appreciation for your contribution.
Okay, thank you, Pak Nyoman. Thank you everyone over there. Thank you, Ibu Ati as well. And thank you for all the for these events. Thank you so much.
Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Ladies and gentlemen, our event has finally reached the end of today. We thank all the attendees for their participation and we apologize for any shortcomings. Wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.